It's crazy. I'm an addict, so I buy guitars because I love guitars, and that's a weakness because you only really need one good one. Sometimes when you're buying stuff, if it has a price tag that's under what you'd expect it to be, you're not really that interested because you know there's something wrong with it or whatever. But I've also found that spending too much money for something is just absolutely not worth it. There's a line there that you cross where you're just spending money for the sake of the name or the label or whatever it is. So I figure you have to spend a little bit of money for quality, but you don't have to spend exorbitant amounts of money for it. People who buy $1 million or $500,000 guitars are the same people, really, mentally anyway, that buy Rolls Royces. And there's a point there where you're buying it because of the year and the value that it's accrued over time. And there was like a period there where everything was astronomical. It's sort of backed up a little bit, but there was a point there where it's like, it's not worth that, and especially not worth that unless you're going to hang it up on a wall at a museum. If you're not going to use it, if it doesn't give you whatever it is that you're supposed to get out of an instrument for that much money, then it just doesn't make any sense. I honestly believe that you can get an excellent, as good as you're ever going to need, new guitar that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. So you start to get into, like, vintage guitars don't all sound good. So it's a matter of, like, you find a vintage guitar that just has this really amazing sound that's unique to it. It takes a second. I mean, the feel, the neck, and I'm pretty flexible too. Like, I can see a good guitar that has things that aren't necessarily perfect on it, but I make it work. Everything doesn't have to fucking check all the boxes. But a good feeling neck is great. The most important thing, though, is when you actually play through it and it has a automatic sound that pleases you. And then that doesn't happen very often. A lot of times you'll pick up a guitar, play it, and go, well, I'll make that work. And you do, because it needs to be in your care and you need to play it for a while, and it'll start to conform to you a little bit. I mean, a shitty sounding guitar is a shitty sounding guitar, but you can find something that, like especially in new guitars, where it's like the potential is there. I just have to work with it a little bit. It's hard. It's hard to really verbally express how that goes. There's a lot of old guitars that I've picked up over the years that are really broken in, that are just really nice and warm. And when Velvet Revolver put out their second record, there was a couple songs on there that I recorded with a 335 that I had back then. And at that time, I tried to make everything sound like a Les Paul through a Marshall. Doesn't matter what it was. That's what it wasn't. It wasn't like I was really getting into different types of guitars for their own unique kind of tone. I was just like, maybe there was something about the guitar, but at the end of the day, I was still trying to make it sound like my Les Paul through a Marshall. So I had problems with it then. But when I was doing this Orgy of the Damned record, I knew that I was going to be doing something that was a little bit more sort of raw and down to earth than your typical Conspirators or Guns N' Roses kind of approach. So I had picked up a 335 from Norm's in LA, and it was a really cool finish and whatnot. And so when I was going into pre-production, I grabbed that guitar and I grabbed some other vintage stuff, and I started playing it, and it just spoke to me. And it's become a thing since then. So now every time when I pull it out during the set, it has its own voice, it has its own, and it's actually really appeals to how I play. I just never really paid that much attention before. But now it's like I can do a lot of stuff on the 335 that I can't necessarily do on a Les Paul. And it's just because of the difference of the way the guitar is built. I've been working with Firebirds for a long time. That's fucking a great guitar, and I've been using that in the set a lot. And I mean, Johnny Winter was the guy that turned me on to Firebirds, and he's one of my all-time favorite guitar players. So you can't say anything wrong about a Firebird. But it is a different application. Like when you come from sort of a rock and roll guitar place from the 80s, everybody was making everything sound the same, using a couple different body shapes with different finishes, but basically the same setup through the same gear, and everybody was geared for that. So Firebirds don't fall into that category. Les Pauls didn't necessarily fall into that category, and regular Strats with with single coils. Everything had to have humbuckers, maybe just one, and a Floyd Rose, and it could be a lot of different, mostly Strat shapes, but V's and Explorers and all that. But they all had the same sound, and so at this point in time, when I listen to all these different guitars, I can really hear the different possibilities, what they do tonally, that didn't exist in the 80s, not for the average kid playing rock and roll guitar. And being that I've been doing this for so long, I'm sort of familiar with most of the stuff that's been around for a while, and a lot of the new stuff that's coming out isn't really all that much different unless you're talking about fractals and all that shit. I think I've learned that the sound that people get for the most part is in their playing, and so when you first get into this, you start looking at all the different varieties of gear and that's out there, and you think, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this, and it's just trial and error. And after years of doing it, you find what's what, and you start to learn that less is more kind of thing. But I hear a lot of really just great players, not necessarily sounds that I'm following. I'm I know what it is that they're playing through, but it's really the player. It's not the tone so much. I mean, you listen to somebody like Billy Gibbons, and that's a whole different thing. It's like, how does he do that? And I played with the guy, and it doesn't mean that you need all this stuff. It's just the way that he plays. The way the record was put together, we had the Blues Ball, which its incarnation was back in the 90s. And so I just picked songs then, and everybody collectively picked songs that we just liked, and we would jam them, right? So when it came to doing this record, I picked a couple songs from back then that I really liked because they appealed to me growing up. And then there were some other songs that I'd never done before that I really liked that I decided to do. Killing Floor was one of them. We'd never played that before. So they were all songs that I wanted to do because they spoke to me. So I've had years to decide which songs to do. For me, it has to have. It could be a clever lyric, obviously a cool guitar hook, something about the melody that is really catchy. But the thing about blues for me is with those two components and some other stuff, and we could go on, but it's really like, it's got a great sexy rhythm to it. It's a certain kind of very sort of, I don't know, sleazy is the right word, but there's a certain kind of sexual thing that happens. And it's delivered with a certain amount of honesty and direct, sort of shameless kind of delivery that just is what it is. Yeah. And it's got, it tends to be raw and down to earth and like that. But it's a lot of different things that could make up for what for me is a really great, blues track. There's really what I would consider what to me is a really good riff. There's a lot of riffs, but then there's the ones that are like, oh, that's and I can't put my finger on what makes that happen. It just is what it is. Yeah. But like, oh, well, I remember that song when I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and it was on the radio. And I didn't know Fleetwood Mac from Adam. I had no idea that was the same band that Stevie Nicks was in. You know what I mean? Like that. And I just loved that song. And I think a lot of it had to do with, and I wasn't aspiring to play an instrument at that time, but I had I gravitated towards really cool guitar riffs. Walk This Way was another one from that same time. The lyric was so fucking in your face and just almost rude, And I was like, what is this song? It's like should be on Dr. Demento because it's so not like your typical kind of a song. And it's not really necessarily even a blues progression. It's not really a blues song in that in the blues sense of the word, but it just is something that I've always liked. So it's something that I had to cover when I was doing this record. There's some songs that we're doing live right now and some other songs that we didn't do on the record that are forcing me to think that I probably have to do another one of these at some point. But there are, I mean, for the record, there wasn't any songs that we tried to do that didn't work, but there are songs that we like that you might try to do that might not work. You know what I mean? So it depends. But yeah, for the record, these were all stuff that we, really had a keen sense of.